if you just arrived, you missed a fantastic Bible school hour. We had several people research some of the courses that we sing, or carols that we sing, sang the first stanza of all of them. And I don't think all the ones that we talked about, none of them were written before 1920 or after 1920. They're all in the 1800s. Some that are still very popular Christmas songs written in the 1700s. Crazy, huh? I had no idea. So thank you very much, everybody who did that research. Just so I don't forget, I'll try to mention it again. But last Sunday, if you were here for Bible study, you looked at a prophecy and then the fulfillment of the prophecy. Don't forget, we're going to finish that, Lord willing, next Sunday morning during Bible study. And so if you're interested in the prophets and the prophets that spoke about the coming of Christ centuries before he came, come on out next week. Well, where are you heading for Christmas? You staying put in your own home? You heading to some winter wonderland far away from here? How do you travel? Plane, train, automobile? Which one? They say that home is where the heart is. So where's your heart today? What is important to you? And where does your family come down in your priority list? Is your heart home, or is it somewhere else? I'll be home for Christmas. Although the events surrounding the birth of Christ had a miraculous flair about it, it's the understatement of the year, there are some principles in the Christmas story for our families here at the holiday time, the Christmas time. There are two counts of the birth of Christ, in Matthew chapter 1, verses 18 to 25, and then the more popular of the two, I think, Luke chapter 2, verses 1 to 20. And so we'll refer back to those. I'm not going to read them, but we'll refer to them and try to look at some of these principles. The first, I would think, is the principle of simply doing what God says to do. Joseph had a plan, right? And then he heard from God, and he changed his plans. Do what God said. Now, today, we hear from God through his word, right? He wrote it down for us, so there's no question about it. Not like, oh yeah, God spoke to me the other night. Well, if he did, you better write that down because that's scripture. Here's his communication to us. His word. And so people read something in the Bible, they hear a preacher preach from the Bible, and they disregard it and do whatever they want to do. The encouragement is do what God wants you to do. Now, in the area of family life, I want you to think about your wedding day. Those who are married, think about your wedding day. And at some portion during that wedding ceremony, you made a promise. And they call it the vows, V-O-W-S, right? And they go something like, I promise to love, honor, and cherish you, right? Be faithful to you until when? Death separates us. That speaks to the covenant. And so we say those vows, and some people, one of the characteristics of a culture that is in decline is the cheapening of the wedding ceremony. And it certainly has been cheapened in the American culture. People make those promises and within months shatter them. Literally months. When you stepped up in front of a preacher justice of the peace or whatever, and you made those promises and you thought about your life, how many of you, everything has gone according to plan? Not a one. Not a one. There's an array of things that put pressure on our vows, on the promises. And we start to think, when that pressure builds and mounts, we start to think that we know better than God. And our heart starts to leave home. We start to check out, looking for a way to get out. But if Joseph would encourage us today, he'd encourage us to do what God says. And stay true to your vows. And some of you in sickness and in health. And some of you are dealing with sick mates. And you're still faithful. Be true to your vows. Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 5 says that it is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. Malachi chapter 2 verse 14 and 15, yet you say, for what reason? Because the Lord has been a witness between you and the wife of your youth, against whom you have dealt treacherously, though she is your companion and your wife by covenant. I preach that to couples that I'm marrying. And in fact, the first part of their wedding ceremony, as Phil Strunk is officiating, leads to that point of you are here to establish a covenant, a sacred bond between a man and a woman and a couple and God. And so that covenant, when God would make a covenant, there was always an oath of fidelity, the oath of death, and basically often a sacrifice went along with it, so there was a cutting. And so when you cut your wedding cake, that was all part of the covenant, the cutting. But basically what they would say when they formed a covenant, when they sacrificed that animal, they say, may I be like that dead carcass if I break this promise. That's how serious a covenant is. And so in Malachi's day, they were breaking that covenant, but not one has done so who has a remnant of the Spirit. And what did that one do while he was seeking a godly offspring? Take heed then to your spirit, and let no one deal treacherously against the wife of your youth. So covenant and promise is very, very serious and very important. I make mention during the ceremony that God has made covenants with people throughout history, and here's what we've learned. We've learned that when covenants were kept, great things happen. But when covenants are broken, unfavorable consequences result. Let's go to the New Testament and read one of the very well-known passages about family. And I'll just make a few comments on it. We're going to start in chapter 5, verse 22, where a lot of people this is where they disagree with God. Wives, be subject to your own husband in the Lord, as to the Lord, right? But sometimes we think that the wife should be a slave to the husband, and we fail to read verse 21 that says, and be subject to one another, be submissive to one another. And so God's just talking in order here. If there's not order, there's chaos, and so he sets some order in place. But the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church. Now, if Jesus is head of the church, does he treat us like slaves? What did he say to his early disciples? I call you friends. We're friends of Jesus. And so, the way we relate in the marriage relationship should be the way that Christ relates to his church in that relationship. And so he himself being the Savior of the body, but as the church is subject to Christ, so also wives ought to be their husbands and everything. Husbands, love your wives as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her. Now, sociologists tell us that every human has two basic needs: to feel secure and to feel significant. You ladies tend to need the significance, or the security, more than the significance, and the men tend to need the significance more than the significance more than the security. All right. That's why when a man loses his job, he goes into depression. Because all those friends that used to hang around, now as the income's down, they don't hang around anymore. He feels like a nobody. So ladies, if you want to build up your man, you let him know you're the greatest man that I know. Case in point, when you come out and say, that's a good sermon, I actually believe you. All right? Of course it is. It's one of the best of this century. Significance and security. And isn't it interesting that God, through the Apostle Paul, said, husbands, you love those wives. Why? Because that gives her security. If you love her, you won't do things to hurt her. You will do things to build her up, make her feel safe, encourage her. And so the Bible says, love her. And that encompasses it all. And so he goes on to say that love your wives as Christ also loved the church. What would Christ do for the church? He gave himself up for her. So you die, not necessarily in a physical sense, but giving preference to her. That's what submission is all about. Giving up your right to have your way. And there needs to be co-submission there in that sense. But sometimes the man thinks, my way or the highway. That's not going to fly too well. And why did he do that? So that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, that he might present to himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she would be holy and blameless. How's your life? Would you describe your life as holy and blameless? I tell you about your individual life because we're a bunch of individuals that come together to form the church. And if we are not individually holy and blameless, the church isn't going to be holy and blameless, right? But that's the kind of church that Jesus is coming back for. And so husbands ought also to love their own wives as their own bodies. Do we even want to go there? He who loves his own wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church, because we are members of his body. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother, and shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And then he says, this mystery is great. But he kind of says, I'm not really talking about marriage. I'm speaking with reference to Christ and the church. And so what I encourage Christian couples, for Christ's sake, have a good marriage. Because you are a picture of Christ, how he deals with the church. That's how your marriage should be. Nevertheless, each individual among you also is to love his own wife. We talked about that, right? Security. What's the other need? Significance. Listen to this. And the wife must see to it that she respects her husband. Significance. And so the psychologists were climbing the mountain of life, and when they got up to the top, there was a theologian sitting there all along, right? God already told us to do that. Except for the general command to love one another, a woman is never commanded to love her husband. I think it helps the relationship to respect him. Because it feeds into his basic needs, which is significant. Now, in case you children think that you're off the hook, in chapter 6, verse 1, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Now, that word obey is the same word that is used about soldiers following the commander. How many veterans do we have in here today? Thank you very much for your service. We appreciate you. Can you remember back in basics? And they get you to a point where you don't think. You simply respond, right? Because if you stop to think, you might be dead. So you train so much, and you don't question orders. Start questioning orders, people die. And so it's a marching order. And so God says, you children, you don't whine and cry and why do I have to do that? If you have Christian parents, you trust them. That they're responsible to God for you. And they'll do what's right if they're following God. He said to honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise. Isn't that interesting? Of all the things that God told us about, the first commandment with a promise that he gave us was in family life. How important is family? So that it may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth. Lisa, when she sees somebody that's old like my mother, who is 91, she always thinks, oh, they must have obeyed their mom and dad. Because they had a long life on the earth. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. Don't make them on. But bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So husband, love your wife. Wife, respect your husband. And children, honor mom and dad. And a great plan for parenting in that last verse, notice he says, bring them up in the discipline of the Lord. That's training and instruction of the Lord. So you can teach them, but if you're not directing them and training them, it's not going to stick. If you try to discipline and don't give them any instruction, they're going to be discouraged because they don't understand why. Now Jesus, in Luke chapter 2, verse 52, is described this way, that he kept increasing in wisdom, stature, and favor with God, and favor with man. So there's a complete person. He grew intellectually in wisdom. He grew physically in stature. He grew socially in favor with men. And he grew spiritually in favor with God. There's a great plan for your parenting. Make sure your children are developing intellectually. Making sure that your children are growing physically, strong physically and socially. That they're able to relate to people. And that they certainly have a relationship with Almighty God to whom they will be accountable one day. In verse 19 of Matthew chapter 1, one of the two places where the birth is mentioned, it speaks of Joseph as a righteous man. Good man. In fact, when he found out that his girlfriend was pregnant out of wedlock, he could have caused some real trouble for Mary. But being a righteous man, he decided to put her away quietly. Just kind of end the relationship, move on. And he heard from God. Ted Engstrom said, simply put, integrity is doing what you said you would do. It's indicated on what you do when nobody's looking. Doing the right thing, doing what God said. Now in Luke chapter 2, now in those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that a census be taken of all the inhabited earth. And this was the first census taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And everyone was on his way to register for the census, each to his own town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth, to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, which, by the way, was in my Bible reading this morning. Micah, the Old Testament prophet of Micah, told about Bethlehem. Because he is the house of the family of David, in order to register along with Mary, who was engaged to him and was with child. How do we know he's a man of integrity? Well, he did what God told him to do, but he also obeyed the law that he was under. He was under Roman law, and the governor said, you need to go to Bethlehem, you need to go to a place of your ancestry and register, because we're going to tax you. And he did it, and he paid the tax. Integrity. It is critical in family life, because children pick out a hypocrite in an instant. This garbage is saying, oh, you just do what I tell you, don't do what I do. That's a hypocrite. No, you should be able to say, you do what I tell you and you watch me, because I will model it for you. Anything less than integrity on the part of a parent can be an embarrassment to your children. So do right. Do what you say you're going to do. Do what God tells you to do. And appreciate what you have been given in your family. Now, being warned of a threat on the child's life, that's often the forgotten part of the Christmas story, isn't it? When Herod was troubled over hearing that there was another king in town, he went and slaughtered all children 2 years of age and under. God told Joseph, take the boy, his mother, and get out of there. And led him to Egypt, relocated in Egypt. And although not stated, Joseph and Mary cared for Jesus when they moved back to Nazareth, to Galilee, and their other children. What? Some of you come from a tradition that says Mary never, only Jesus broke her rules. But that's not what the Bible says. The Bible talks about Jesus' brothers. At first, when Jesus went into ministry, his brothers thought they were a little cookie, right? They didn't believe in him. But they eventually came around. So they cared for their children. And being righteous, they surely adhered to Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 8, which is part of the law, but the principles are there. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons. And talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and shall be as frontals on your forehead. We used to wear these little pouches and headbands and had scriptures in there. That's what we're talking about. Excuse me. And so they abided by that, and protected and provided for their family. And so let's recognize this Christmas season that family is a gift from the Lord. Your marriage. What did my marriage to Lisa do? A lot of things. But the one thing I may appreciate the most is that I have a lifelong companion. Different. She's a female. So she thinks a little differently than I do. What important matters we think the same. That's why when the Lord talks about marrying to his followers, that's why he says that Christians marry Christians. Because the spiritual things, the unseen things, are the most important things. What the Bible says, the things that we see are temporary. The things we don't see are eternal. Faith, salvation, hope. And so if you're not united on those spiritual things, it's going to be tough. Lifelong communion. That's God's design and desire. Remember, do what God says. Stay true. And always remember that marriages are like a roller coaster, aren't they? You get these high points. Boy, you never so high as on wedding day, right? All been downhill since then. But it comes back up. We got a high mountaintop. We got the valleys too. And what happens a lot of time when people are down in the gully, that's when they throw in the towel. If they just hold on, they come back up. Roller coaster. So let me ask you, who's hurt when a marriage falls apart? Certainly those mates do. But if there's children involved, they're the real broken pieces. I want to ask you to pray for my brother-in-law and my sister-in-law. That's where Lisa and I were for Thanksgiving. But when we found out, just over the last couple of days, that it looks like they're heading for divorce. And Annika, who was born with a cleft palate, has had multiple surgeries. She's a freshman in high school now. She's Roy's. And Gabriel, who's in elementary school, is Roy and Stephanie. What's going to happen to those children when that marriage falls apart? Pray for them, please. So for the sake of the children, have a strong marriage. For the sake of the church, have a strong marriage. And for the sake of our society, have a strong marriage. Because all of these things are only as strong as the families that make them up, right? If the families are weak, churches are weak. Society is weak. If the families are strong, the church is strong. That's made up of family, for the most part. And we're all family. You know, even if you're a single person, you have a family. Psalm 127:3 says, "Behold, children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward, not a burden." They are a blessing. So protect them and provide for them physically, emotionally, spiritually. Participate fully in the family. Make some memories together. Lisa and I were taught before we even had children, don't spend a lot of money on stuff, on new furniture. Spend the money making memories. A long time before we ever bought new furniture. Because we want to make memories with the kids. Did you ever hear the 10 Commandments of the house home rule? If you sleep on it, make it up. If you wear it, hang it up. If you drop it, pick it up. If you eat out of it, put it in the sink. If you step on it, wipe it off. If you open it, close it. If you empty it, fill it up. If it rains, answer it. If it howls, feed it. If it cries, love it. But where's your heart today? Is it home? We're somewhere on this life's journey. You may be a Christian. And if you're like me, I get homesick for heaven. Wake up thinking perhaps today. Oh, we realize we're not there yet. Or maybe your heart can't get past the here and now. Again, I tell you, you weren't built for here. God built you for eternity. There's some wonderful things waiting for you. Things like forgiveness and joy and peace and fulfillment in life. And so my encouragement to you, if you have not done this already, come to the Christ, the child that was born into the family of Joseph and Mary. Come home to the Lord. Let's continue to sing.